All right, hello out there, AP World Historians. It is your AP World History teacher, Ben Osborne. Feeling a little bit up here right now, but we'll get through it as best we can. We're looking here at Unit 3.3 and beyond. This is kind of the culmination of Unit 3, so just kind of three slideshows for Unit 3. We'll go through this section, which is primarily about belief systems, and we'll do sort of a little bit of comparison along the way, because there is that 3.4 section, but it's kind of small and like kind of a remix kind of thing, so we're not going to cover it with a lot of detail. Now, for whatever reason, in land-based empires, they kind of stick this random thing here, I think because it's happening around the same time, and it's also happening in some of these land-based empires, I guess. I don't know. It seems kind of randomly tacked on, but sometimes these things seem that way in general. But that's okay. So we're basically going to be looking at a few changes, belief systems. Protestant Reformation is a big factor here, as well as a couple of other things. So let's get to it. Let's work on through this information. Let's start off here with in Europe, okay, the Protestant Reformation. So we haven't talked as much about Europe here. Oh, look, I got a chicken foot next to my head. We have not talked as much about Europe here. We talked a little bit about the absolutism versus like divine right of kings, constitutionalism and all that kind of stuff, but not a ton. But that's going on at the same time that all this is happening as well. So essentially the Renaissance ideas of humanism that like as all this new learning comes in and people start thinking a bit more about how the world works and where it works and what it's doing, people are starting to think a bit about it and start to challenge the power of the church, trying to say, well, maybe the church isn't as powerful or shouldn't be as powerful in the places where we are. Rulers are going to begin challenging the political authority of the church. The problem for the church was that there's a whole bunch of little states. The church had a hard time controlling them. And in this period, we're going to start to see the idea of nationalism. So for a lot of European history, you were not so much a French person as you were like a subject of the French king, right? It's very different and distinct. But this is a time period when people start recognizing similarities. Oh, we almost all speak French. We also have similar religious beliefs or similar like thought beliefs or whatever. So we start to have this change where people start to think a bit more about like themselves as like actual French people or English people or whatever than we had otherwise. And so that meant that it was very difficult for the church to have any sort of control over them. We also have this issue of the church becoming extremely corrupt in this period. Wealth of the church made people very jealous, and one of the examples of this is the selling of indulgences. This is the idea that like you basically can commit sins, but the church will sort of clear you or clear you after the fact, and all you have to do really is just give some money to the church. So it's not about like not committing sin and then feeling bad about that sin. It's almost like I committed a sin and I'm going to pay you off, right? So a lot of people got pretty mad about it. One example would be this right above me here. This is a portrayal of the Pope during this time period of the Protestant Reformation. You can see many people thought of him as the devil, hence the chicken feet, I guess, and the wings and all that kind of stuff. All right. Memes are hard to translate, but that one always makes me laugh. For Protestant Reformation, then, what's going to happen? We got three major reformations, though there are lots of smaller ones. In fact, even before this official Protestant Reformation, we also have a group of people called the Hussites under John Huss, who are also going to have a lot to do with the church as well, or reforming the church as well. But the first of these reformers is this guy, Martin Luther. Okay, 1517, he's going to nail these 95 theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg. These are complaints against the church. He is basically a priest. He is a priest monk of the Catholic Church. He is a churchman, but he is unhappy with the way the church is doing things. So he wants it to change, but instead, he was excommunicated. The church didn't take his criticism very well, and they choose basically just to kick him out. He is actually for a while hunted down. He has to get protection from the church and all this kind of stuff. Eventually, the church just kind of decides to, cut its losses in a sense and leave him alone. And so he will start a sect known as Lutheranism. This is a division of the Catholic Church, and it's into what we might call Protestantism. So Protestantism or Protestant is all about protesting, right? So protest the Catholic Church. Around the same time, then, we have this other guy, Calvin, John Calvin, or Jean Calvin. Calvinism is founded by him in Switzerland. It's a different type of God, viewpoint of God. He believed in a much harsher viewpoint of God, that God was sort of a punisher, basically that was the key focus there. He is also going to bring in the concept of predestination to Protestantism. So this is basically the argument that if God is all-powerful and omniscient, if he can see and understand everything that's out there in the world, then he basically understands already what we're doing, right? Like he's going to understand our lives, what choices we're going to make, etc. So in other words, in a sense, free will is kind of a illusion, right? Like we may theoretically have free will, but in reality, it's really not there entirely because God has the ability to choose these things. And he also believed that people would be sort of notable for their predestination, like they would be known for this by how successful they are in their lives. So this is where we get the idea of the Protestant work ethic. People who are Calvinists or believed in predestination believed that if they were wealthy, if they did a good job in life, then that meant that they were, in a sense, favored by God. So that is why they will try to do such things. Lastly, we have Anglicanism. This is going to result from a political disagreement between Henry VIII and the Pope. Political disagreement is kind of a funny way to put it. Basically, he wants to divorce his wife, who he has been unable to have male children with. The Pope does not want to do that because the Pope is allied with his wife's kingdom. Catherine of Aragon is her name. So instead, he decides to just leave the church and create his own church with the Archbishop of Canterbury as the head. He gets his divorce and a couple more as well as some other stuff. And he will create his own version. So what's interesting about this then is that Anglicanism, especially initially, but even today in a bit, is sort of like very similar to Catholicism in a lot of ways. They have like a lot of the priestly garb and all this kind of stuff, but it's a little bit different. Same thing with some of the other ones, but they're going to be different as well. Like Lutherans and others are going to move further away from that idea of the church being more formal and stuff instead. I really like this little map here, major branches within Christianity. I think growing up, we didn't get as much church knowledge, we didn't get as much history and stuff, which as a history teacher really kind of bugs me a bit. So I love looking at these kind of things because I love understanding how different it was. Like Christianity has had many different versions and like ideas and concepts, right? Like there's not just one or two or whatever. There's tons of people who have different perspectives and different ideas about how the church works and what it does and how it works, right? So, for example, we have this initial state there of early Christianity, but then we're going to have a couple of councils. Like, basically, there wasn't a lot of connection between the different bishops and churches, and so they start kind of having these councils to kind of make things work together. Like, they kind of realize that, we're all kind of doing different stuff. Like, why don't we try to work it out? But when they do these councils, then there's disagreements over certain things. So, for example, at the Council of Ephesus in 431, we are going to have a split here with the Nestorians, which is the Assyrian Church of the East, or these Eastern versions of Christians. If you want me to go into some details about exactly what's different with these folks, it's a little difficult. I don't exactly know all the details, but still, this is a early version of Christianity. Next up, we got the Oriental Orthodox, who was split off under the Council of Chalcedon in 451, the Miaphysites. So these two churches then, to some degree, still exist around the world. Then we are going to have the Great Schism of the 11th century. Now, the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics had disagreed with each other for quite a while. The primary disagreement is this question of who's in charge. Is the Pope the first among equals and therefore the head bishop, like the bishop over everybody else? Or are each of the different churches individually able to do what they want? So the Greek church, or the Russian church or whatever, are they supposed to be independent? Those who believe in the power of the Pope to be the first among equals will become Roman Catholics. Those who disagree with that then will become the Eastern Orthodox. All right. So what happens then is that this split occurs, and we will end up moving further down the little chart there. You can see there's a couple of attempts at union over time. So, for example, some of these Eastern Orthodox bishops will come over to Roman Catholicism, but they will want to keep their way of worship. Therefore, it says Eastern rites. So, in other words, they are in communion with the See of Rome as Catholics, but they do like things more like the Eastern Orthodox would. And then right there, you'll see where we are, Reformation in the 16th century. You'll see the divisions there. We have the Anglicans, we have Protestantism, Anabaptism. Eventually, this idea of Restorationism. This is like the modern day where we have what are they called? Like charismatics and other groups like that, more modern Christians. They believe essentially that they are a separate lineage that has restored the ideas of Catholicism, or of the early church. So long story short here, there's a lot of divisions, right? Like this Protestant Reformation is not a brand new thing. It's actually something that's been going on for quite a while. So we are having some changes and differences here that are not unusual within Christianity. Looking here at Europe, we can see the different spreads of these religions. So, for example, Lutheranism there in Wittenberg will go towards the north. So, therefore, modern-day Sweden, Denmark, Norway, they tend to be Lutherans up there. We will also see Anglicans. They will kind of stay basically where they are because it's mostly just going to be there in England. And then we have our Calvinists, okay, from Geneva in the Swiss Confederation. They will end up having a lot of influence on southern France, northern, kind of like, where is that, Netherlands, right? And they also get up there to Scotland. So like the Presbyterians, for example, are modern day versions of Calvinists as well. You can see here, this is in 1555 or so, what the different versions of Christianity are at this time period. So you can see there, we have Roman Catholics in Ireland, Spain, France, Italy, you know, these kind of places. But we're also going to see some divisions here too, right? So you can see Anglicans up there for England, that's just pure Anglicanism, basically. In the outer Isles of Scotland, you'll have some Catholicism, but also a lot of that Calvinism there in Scotland. Other places, though, we have a big division, right? So if you look at southwestern France there, you'll see that it is not only Catholic, but it also has some Calvinists down there. We are also going to have, in the Holy Roman Empire, is just an utter mess with all the different groups that are up there. Lutherans, Catholics, other groups as well. You can see those Hussites we were talking about there in Bohemia and Moravia. And then other areas like Russia are going to be full-on Eastern Orthodox, but places like Poland will be divided up. And then obviously we have Islam within the Ottoman Empire as well. Today, these are largely similar. Like there's a lot more diversity in religion these days, but you know, if you are from Sweden, you're probably a Lutheran. If you are in Italy, you're probably a Catholic. Like these kind of divisions have stayed fairly similar over time. Just as an example here of some of the comparison that we can do between the Catholics and the Protestants then. For the Catholics, religious authorities believe that the Pope and church hierarchy interprets the Bible for the people, whereas in the Protestants, they believe the Bible should be interpreted by individuals. So each church, in a sense, is independent. So within the Catholic hierarchy, you know, your priest is going to talk to you about the Bible and kind of interpret it for you. Within the Protestant world, the pastor may say some things about the Bible, but theoretically, it's up to you to interpret that information. You know, obviously, because individuals are interpreting the Bible, that can oftentimes lead to a lot of division, which is why the Protestants tend to have a lot of individual little sects and groups. For salvation then, the Catholics place importance on church sacraments, if you are not Catholic. What that means basically is things like marriage and communion and all these like, you know, different sacraments that they have are super important. You need to do all those kind of things, right? For the Protestants then, some of them may do those sacraments, like the sacrament of marriage is very common, or alternately, like Anglicans will do a type of communion. But they believe that those are sort of just like symbols, basically, that faith alone is the most important thing, that you have to have faith that Christ died for your sins in order for you to achieve salvation, and that whether you do the sacraments or not is sort of secondary to the whole process. Denominations then, Catholics are basically Catholicism. There are like some kind of little individual groups like the fundamental, well, that's not fundamentalist Catholics. There's like independent Catholics or something like that, but they're people usually who just disagree with Rome and sort of kind of split off a little bit. For the Protestants then, we got tons. I'm going to lean down a little bit here. We got tons of people. Anglicans, Baptists, Calvinists, Lutherans, Adventists, Amish, evangelicals, Mormons also. That's maybe a little controversial, but I guess it is technically split off from Protestantism, so that would be an example as well. All right. Now, the Catholics aren't going to take this laying down, folks. They're not just going to be like, it's fine. Y'all go ahead and do what you want to do. They're losing followers, right? And the Catholic Church ends up being led by some reformers like Popes Paul III and the Fourth. And so they are going to do a couple things to try to bring these folks back into the fold. Ignatius of Loyola was a key reformer. This guy will founded a group called the Jesuits. They will be sort of formally brought into this hierarchy during the Counter-Reformation. They're essentially supposed to do a couple different things. One is set up schools, basically, do a lot of missionary work, and also stop the spread of Protestantism. That missionary work's big. Like they go to like China. Like there's some indications they almost convert the Emperor of China to Christianity, which is wild. So those are the kind of things they're going to do. But you probably know them most today from schools. Places like Georgetown were founded by Jesuits. You can still see those Jesuit priests there on campus, as well as a few others. That's their symbol up there, basically. It is IHS there with the cross and all that in it. Paul III will do things like investigating corruption, like Indulgences, and we will also have this thing known as the Council of Trent. This is where the church will get together and talk. They're kind of like looking at this like, okay, so did we do something wrong? Or like, do we need to change things? Like, what's the situation with this? Why is this going on? And so the church reinterprets, the church agrees on certain things, right? Like they reinforce previous Catholic doctrine, like that the church interprets the Bible. That is set in stone. We're just going to keep doing that, right? They also believe that you need good works and salvation, for example, that the Bible and the church were the authority. But they will also do things like banning indulgences. So they're trying to like kind of weed out the worst parts that have been built up in the Catholic Church over time, while also reaffirming the basic concepts and ideas of the Catholic Church. Okay, and that is the way the church has worked since then, basically, with the exception of maybe like Vatican II or something, but otherwise pretty similar. All right, looking at some religious conflicts then. Now, this division between Protestants and Catholics is going to cause lots and lots of strife and turmoil. In the Holy Roman Empire, we have the Catholics and the Lutherans, and the Holy Roman Empire is represented by these Catholic princes. So there's going to be a conflict going on there, and this thing called the Peace of Augsburg will state that each German state could decide if their leader would be Lutheran or Catholic. This is an example, many people say, of sort of a nascent kind of nationalism, that the local area is able to make some of these choices. In France, then, we have a group of Protestants called Huguenots. The French Catholics and Huguenots will fight each other. Eventually, there will be this thing called the Edict of Nantes, which will allow Protestants to practice. I believe it's Henry IV is the one. He is a Huguenot, but he is going to take on the throne, and he converts to Catholicism because otherwise he was not going to be the new king. And so his famous phrase is that Paris is worth a mass. But once he gets there, then he tries to make it so that those who are Protestants can worship better through things like the Edict of Nantes. It's an important example of legal religious tolerance, though it is kind of like repealed pretty soon after this. But still, it's an early example of this. Then we also have the 30 Years' War. This is the Catholics versus Protestants, again, in the Holy Roman Empire. Eventually, this is settled out by the Peace of Westphalia, which stated that each area of the Holy Roman Empire could choose to be Catholic, Calvinist, or Lutheran. It's kind of like a resubmission, like a solidification of that ideas under the Peace of Augsburg. So Holy Roman Empire is over there on the left, not one we talk about a ton. It's just this kind of big, weird conglomeration. If you look up there in the top part up there, you'll see this other map that has like all the different little local areas of the Holy Roman Empire. It's an absolute mess. Like, it is not an organized empire at all. The red means it's a kingdom. They have principalities, lordships, archbishoprics, palatinates, duchies, archduchies, landgraviates, and all this other stuff. So each one of those people is very much individualized, but they have this emperor who's at the top who kind of doesn't have a ton of authority, really. So kind of a mess. And that also kind of leads back to this idea of this religious tradition. So I don't think I can quite get out of the way enough here, but you can see behind me here, the green is going to be the Catholic Church. The, what is that? I think it's the yellowy orange. I don't know. That's going to be that's going to be the Lutherans, I believe. And then the other group is going to be the Calvinists. So that's an example of the divisions that they're going to eventually end up with. But part of the reason for that division is because this whole entire empire is just all over the place. It's not particularly well organized. All right, let's move away from Europe with the little time we got left, and let's talk a bit about a couple of another example of religions here, which is the development of Sikhism and this idea of a syncretic religion. So the definition of syncretic is the combination of different forms of belief or practice. It is usually used in reference to like a cultural thing. So like you would say syncretic religion, syncretic languages, maybe, syncretic culture, that kind of stuff. The big one in this time period then is going to be the development of Sikhism. This is a monotheistic religion. It is around today. There's still millions of Sikhs around today. Founded by Guru Nanak. It originated in India, and it combined some of the Islamic and Hindu beliefs together. That is Guru Nanak up there at the top. The major beliefs is that everyone is equal before God, an emphasis on community and living with kindness and honesty. They believe in the cycle of rebirth, sort of like Hinduism, and they use this sort of phrase here, pray, work, and give. They're big on charity. This picture right above me here is going to be the Sikh symbol. They believe in these certain symbols to indicate that you are a Sikh and that you're willing to help people. Helping people is a super huge part of this religion. Lastly, then, let's take a look at a sort of, I wouldn't say it's a counter example, but something else that's developing at the same time. While religion is changing, how we learn was changing as well, primarily around this question of how we learn and what we will learn from there. So prior to this revolution of the scientific revolution, people looked at traditional sources like the Bible to answer scientific questions. So if the question was, why does the sun set in the east or west or whatever, why is the sun set in the west, right? They're going to look to the Bible and traditional sources, right? They're going to look back to the Romans or to the Greeks or others to try to figure this out. Oh, look, here in this passage it says this, or the ancient scientists of the Greeks said this, so therefore that must be the case. So that's the big difference then, is that now people are going to try to use this thing known as the scientific method in like testing and so forth. So this thing right here above me is the scientific method. You're probably familiar with it from your science classes, but it's the idea that you're going to ask a question, you're going to do some background research, construct a hypothesis, then you're going to test an experiment, and if that experiment works, then you can analyze data, draw conclusions, and if I move my head, then you can from there determine whether the results align with the hypothesis or don't, and then you communicate those results, right? So in other words, you're going to test your hypotheses to figure things out. That was revolutionary and quite different from what had happened before. So we will start in this period to have famed scientists. They're really going to start a lot with astronomy. So Galileo, Copernicus are going to be big factors there. We also will move on to other sciences then. Newton for physics, for example. Boyle for, I think it's chemistry. Bacon, Galen, Paracelsus, and a whole bunch of other folks. There's tons of these scientific revolution figures that are doing all this stuff in this period. So lots of new examples of scientific research and learning come in here, and this will have a huge impact on the power of the Europeans very, very soon. All right, folks, that's what we got for today. Hope that helped you out a little bit, and looking forward to checking out Unit 4 with you pretty soon. That's going to be where we're going to start doing some transoceanic voyaging. Y'all take care. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.